Thank you. Thank you. The reason that I created this podcast is because I want to feel better. So many of the right-wing talk show hosts that I've listened to over the years make me feel worse, more anxious, more fearful, angrier. And I want to feel better, and I want the people who listen to my podcast to feel better after having listened to it than they did at the beginning.
I thought I knew you pretty well. Somebody says you have pets, you have chickens?
Mm-hmm. I have chickens.
On.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you don't live on a ranch. How do you...
I have a 2-acre ranch.
I didn't know that.
And,
Well, that's not a big ranch, 2 acres.
it is to me, Johnny.
Well, yeah.
But I do have chickens.
But you keep them for the eggs, or...
Yeah, I keep them for the eggs. I don't... It's just kind of a strange thing. I like the chickens. It's something to visit, you know? And my wife and I have been married for 40 incredible years, and I'm extremely happy. I'm completely programmed. Taken 40 years, you know, to finally... Yes. So, after I've left her, go out to the other acre, and... the chickens are there. I don't like to eat a dead chicken. Not that I like, live chicken or something else, but I...
What are you, a geek or something?
Well, no. Hey, listen, you can have fun with Diet Pepsi, yeah.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Enemies of My Country Saturday, March the 30th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for retrogrades, rules for patriots, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and the enemies of my country. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch, 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
In a commercial world, we bump regularly against strangers, but the strangers become friends. To my friends, the communitarians, I say, your sweet ends are achieved precisely by commerce. Deirdre N. McCoskey. Rather than demonize business, we ought to embrace the social reality that community is enhanced by trade and commerce. To believe that we create fuller communities by denying them free exchange with one another is to assert the idiotic. In the context of commercial endeavors, true friendships can be born, not always, but certainly often. In the context of a commerce-free world, social alienation is assured.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
Admittedly, this is a riskier strategy. But think of the fun you could have by voting for every tax increase, expanding welfare, promising every American, including illegal Americans who haven't even stolen across the borders yet, a guaranteed annual wage, one that would allow them to live in affordable housing anywhere in the U.S. of A. at taxpayer expense. Why, there's no end to it. If Jonathan Swift could offer his modest proposal to eat Irish babies and thus reduce the number of the starving people, why don't you do the same sort of thing? Come to think of it, a few new modest proposals on the right internet site might do some viral wonders. And don't just stop with taxes. Universal health care? Sure. A chicken in every pot and 2 cars in every garage? Make it some lentil soup and 1 green car and a couple of bicycles, and you got yourself a deal. Free energy. Why not? The sun's free, isn't it? Energy ought to be a human right, just like in Europe, where 6-week vacations and spa time at state expense would be enshrined in their Bill of Rights, if they had a Bill of Rights. After all, FDR famously floated his ideas of a new Bill of Rights and his 4 freedoms, which included freedom from want and freedom from fear. So why not keep going, right down the line? Yeah, I know that lunatic Rusky babe, Ayn Rand, tackled some of this material in Atlas Shrugged, her perfectly ludicrous novel of an America run by petty little frightened men who speak in NPR voices and have mastered the art of sophist discourse to the point where they almost believe it themselves. It's a wonderful world she paints over the course of the novel's first 1 million pages or so, a place where one lone evil capitalist, the super slim, super smart, super determined, super slinky, super sexy Dagny Taggart, holds out against the legitimate demands of the various people's republics until her whole ill-gotten railroad empire is finally forced under, and America is severed in the middle and forced to regress to a simple, more agrarian time when we lived as one with nature. Luckily, you don't have the guts to go all the way and call her bluff. There probably isn't a John Galt among you. Whoever the hell he is, I couldn't finish the damn thing. Anyway, you may not have to. You have a terrific case study unfolding before your very eyes in the imploding social democracies of Europe. A smoking time bomb of all our crackpot ideas in action. They're going to go up a bit ahead of your good old US of A. The chaos is unfolding now. Call attention to it. At dinner parties, in the office, in cabs, at the grocery store, at your barbershop and hairdresser. Oh my God, can you believe what's happening in Europe? Sure hope it doesn't happen here. We've got to get some sane people in Washington. It's not so hard to start a few stampedes if you push the right buttons often enough. I realize that many of you pathetic cowards, and weaklings are positively riven with doubts about yourselves and the rightness of your cause. You're squeamish about adopting our tactics, that they are somehow beneath you, that our ruthless amoralism may not be to your fastidious liking. Well, tough. There is plenty of time down the line for you to get all turn the other cheek Christian on me. But right now, you are in a fight. And from San Louis at the Crusades to MacArthur on the beach, great leaders have learned to set aside the dictates of Scripture in order to get the job done. In fact, you're sitting there reading this and thinking right this minute, hey, what the hell? This Dave guy makes a pretty good case for just giving up and giving in. And after all, in the long run, we'll all be dead, so what does it matter anyway? Or words to that effect. Go ahead, keep thinking that. Which brings me to David Mamet in The Untouchables, and the most important question I can possibly pose to you, courtesy of Jimmy Malone.
And that was Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, rules for retrogrades, 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 34. Never deny being a retrograde. Looking feckless, you will be called one anyway. Peter denied Christ thrice and fooled no one, looking only a coward, fumbling and playing for time. Denying or watering down one's retrograde principles results in the worst of both worlds. The denier or mitigator forfeits both his honesty and his principle. Dishonest cowards are the denizens of no man's land. One unwilling to go to bat for his friend or to be included as a fellow traveler deserves no friends. There's nothing less honorable than selling out your own title and your own people. For all their want of principle, radicals understand this one well. Denying membership among the retrogrades comprises the ultimate form of bad optics for conservatives. It happens far too frequently in politics and culture. Remember the fair-weather friend back in the middle school cafeteria who shared your values but who always had one eye on membership in another social group? Long wistful of sexier social standing, this fair-weather friend proves the worst sort of opportunist, one who abandons his camp in the face of the first tormentor or detractor. That middle school friendship was doomed to die an early death all along, but that ignobility is reserved for middle school, right? Adult culture and politics have been ennobled by age and experience, right? No way. Conversely, true friends are stalwarts. As such, they are as rare in grown-up America as in middle school. Retrogrades are dear friends and brethren, fellows you haven't met yet. Unlike most of the other rules for retrogrades, the majority of retrogrades already know and cherish this one by instinct. Own who you are. Boldly be one of your own people. Defend your brothers at arms by proudly donning the shield and crest. All this involves a most critical distinction. In the implementation of these rules, act wholly without hesitation or apology, but avoid needless heat. Many retrogrades will be befuddled by this subtle yet vital distinction, because when wrongly understood, it sounds very much like something a moderate would say. Yet in reality, it proves to be nothing of the sort. While never denying who he is, the retrograde must choose his battles wisely. For once engaged in battle, the retrograde can never back down. The single battle that cannot be afforded is the middle school treachery of opportunistic turncoats. Become who you were born to be. A retrograde.
And that was Rule 34 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
While the Democrats prefer the pedal to the metal, the Republican Party establishment is happy just leaving it on cruise control. But make no mistake, we head in the wrong direction, no matter who wins. The only debate is about the rate of speed. As former Congressman J.C. Watts once told me, they just manage the decay. These people tolerate us at best and despise us at worst. They define their leadership by our followership. To them, leadership isn't about setting an example of boldness and courage and advancing our principles. It's about getting the people and constituencies you presume to be under your control to do what you want them to do. A mainstream media reporter once told me off the record, quote, "These ruling class Republicans you speak of really do think they're entitled to your vote." In other words, it's about power, plain and simple. The more we assert ourselves and try to take control of the process, the whinier they get. The more blatant and desperate they get to keep control too. Like when Congressman Eric Cantor openly urged Democrats to cross over into the Republican primary to save establishment rhino Richard Lugar in his 2012 Senate primary. Or when Ditch McConnell plays dirtier with his primary challenger in Kentucky, Matt Bevin, than he does President Obama. Remember the friend I wrote about in my introduction that beat a well-funded Democrat from a powerful family despite getting no help from the GOP establishment? Do you know how the Republican Party reacted to his win? The Republican governor of my state appointed the Democrat he defeated to a position in his administration. But that's the Republican Party establishment, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory since 1976. This brings me to my sixth commandment. Never, ever abandon your base unless they're morally wrong. The Republican Party establishment always ends up fighting a two-front war between its base and the Democrats. Meanwhile, the Democrats come across as a united front. While that's not always the case, it appears that way because the Republican Party establishment consistently violates this commandment. An example from my own state's legislature illustrates my point. The Democrat state Senate leader in my state is a fearless hard-left ideologue, the sort of leader you love when he's on your team, hate when he's not. I can't recall a single time he's backed down to the Republicans on anything in the last 5 years. He ruthlessly pushes his agenda and rules with an iron fist. If any somewhat moderate Democrats, hey, I live in the heartland, there might still be a few. If any somewhat moderate Democrats get squishy, they get rolled. On the other hand, he protects the true believers with all his might. This sends a message. If you're on board with the ideological agenda, we've got your back. If you're not, we don't. Wouldn't you love this guy to be a conservative? But then there was the Republican speaker in my state house. He views himself as a consensus builder, not an ideologue, which really means he's middle management. He doesn't like to bring things up for a vote unless they'll pass and everyone in his majority is on the same page. His number one goal is not to advance the issues in the party platform. Rather, it is to maintain what he's told me, quote, a family atmosphere, and turn conservatives into, quote, team players. He's not a general. He's a babysitter. You know, like John Boehner. After getting the majority, he backed down on allowing votes on protecting Second Amendment rights and personhood in an effort to protect the squishiest in his own caucus. They didn't want grassroots to know where they truly stood on the issues because they wanted to avoid a primary. He put consensus ahead of convictions, and by doing so, he drove a wedge right through the middle of his own base. His problem is the newly elected conservatives of 2010 didn't go to my state capital to play footsie with Democrats and hold a never-ending schedule of fundraisers. They went there to get things done and then go home. So instead of falling in line with the rest of the groupthink, they used procedural motions to force Second Amendment and pro-life votes over the leadership's wishes. By standing for unity's sake, and not unifying his caucus around the principles that make us Republicans in the first place, my Republican speaker ended up fanning the very flames of conservative insurrection that he was trying to douse. In the spring of 2012, my state had a record number of primaries, and the Republican establishment lost almost all of them. The Republican Party establishment tried to blame it on redistricting, but the Democrats faced redistricting too. Yet they didn't face this level of internal turmoil. Why is that? Because their leader was leading on their issues. Our leader was the blind leading the blind. The Democrat leadership in my state legislature united around holding the line for the child killers, moral depravity lobby, educrats, and statists. Meanwhile, the Republican leadership, I guess we'll call it that, in my state legislature united around how they could diffuse conservative zeal. So they didn't offend the child killers, moral depravity lobby, educrats, and statists. One approach led to a united base. The other abandons your base and leads to a two-front war. A similar scene played out nationally during the great overhyped government shutdown of 2013. Rather than hold the line on defunding Obamacare, a majority of Senate Republicans sided with Harry Reid and against Senators Ted Cruz, Mike Lee, and the American people. Rather than holding the line on defunding Obamacare, House Speaker John Boehner used Democrat votes to cave. This is what happens when you don't stand united on principle, but are a movement run by shills, gutless cowards, and feckless bureaucrats. There is no other way to spin this. Obama completely routed Republican leadership. He removed their manly parts and showed it to them on a national stage. He completely depanted them. Obama hasn't done much right during his presidency, which is why when the chips are down, he knows he can always pick a fight with Republican leadership. They have acted as his reliable slump buster throughout his presidency, and this time they came through big time. I loathe the GOP establishment with all my heart, but even I pitied them in this case. They think they're getting out of their consultant's doghouse, but what they're really doing is signing their own death certificates. Begrudgingly, give the devil his due. These statist progressives really know how to play the game. Then again, it helps when you actually believe in your cause. Right now, the people running our side don't believe in ours. The Republican Party establishment is struggling with the fact we in the grassroots are fighting back. They're used to the previous generation that just wanted to be patronized, validated with a pointless proclamation or a pro-life license plate, and then went home to play bingo or watch Murder, She Wrote. I recall a one-on-one meeting I had with a Republican leader early in my radio career when I was really ornery. No, really, I've actually mellowed out a little bit. Anyway, we were sitting down for breakfast, and as I'm eating my omelet, he proceeds to lecture me about how naive I am, about how the political process works, and that I'm asking for far too much. It sounded like a spiel he had given dozens of times to well-meaning but utterly harmless Christian conservatives who just don't know any better and think, "Thou must be nicer than God no matter what, while hell ruthlessly advances," is like the 11th commandment inadvertently left out of the Bible. He was about to find out I'm not one of those do-gooders who wears socks with sandals and gets up in the morning with a pair of khakis on. I let him ramble on, unchallenged, just long enough for me to finish my omelet. Forgive me, but I live in Iowa, where farm fresh food must come first. After I finished the last morsel, I looked at him and asked him if it was okay for me to respond to what he was saying. "Sure," he said. I looked him right in the eye, and I calmly said, "I want to quote for you the immortal words of the great prophet Nick Nolte in the movie 48 Hours. We ain't partners, we ain't brothers, and we ain't friends. I'm not a team player, and I don't want to be. I don't want to hang out with you. I already have a family, and my schedule is full. I get up in the morning and go work out, even if it doesn't look like it. Then I go to work. I come home. I play with my kids. After my kids go to bed, I play with my wife. And the process repeats itself the next day. Don't give me your card. I'm not giving you mine. I don't want your cell phone number, and I'm not giving you mine. I don't want to sit next to your political hacks at the party fundraiser. What I do want is for you to do your damn job, and that job is fighting for us on the issues we care the most about. If you do that, I will be the best friend you've ever had. But if you sell us out, I will make you hate life for 3 hours a day on a 50,000-watt radio station. Are we clear?" "Crystal," he replied. "That's how it's done. This is how the employer, us, recovers the leverage with our employees, them." By the way, given his actions afterwards, it was obvious he didn't get the message. But he's out of politics now, and I'm still here, so he ended up getting it after all. These people work for us. They're not a ruling class, and they're not matinee idols on the cover of Tiger Beat. We must never forget that. And more importantly, we must never let them forget it either. We don't thank them for giving us our time or pose for pictures with them like we're groupies. Does your boss thank you for your time when he needs you to do your darn job? Does your boss pose for pictures with you and ask for your autograph? We need to stop feeding the animals and start reining them in. More and more of you are getting the picture, which is why more and more of them are losing their jobs. In the 2012 Texas Republican primary, 10 incumbents were defeated in one night. In the 2014 Texas Republican primary, it was a clean sweep for the Tea Party. God bless Texas. This trend needs to not just continue, but be ramped up even further. The Republicrats can't help but betray their own base because they're not one of us. It's like I said earlier in this book, show me your faith or your principles and I'll show you your works. You know a tree by its fruit. We fight because we're fighting for what we believe in.
And that was Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Daily Law for March the 30th.
March 30th. Fuse the intuitive with the rational. B. The great chess master Bobby Fischer spoke of being able to think beyond the various moves of his pieces on the chessboard. After a while, he could see fields of forces that allowed him to anticipate the entire direction of the match. For the pianist Glenn Gould, he no longer had to focus on notes or parts of the music he was playing, but instead saw the entire architecture of the piece and could express it. Albert Einstein suddenly was able to realize not just the answer to a problem, but a whole new way of looking at the universe contained in a visual image he intuited. In all of these instances, these practitioners of various skills described a sensation of seeing more. All of us have access to this higher form of intelligence, one that can allow us to see more of the world, to anticipate trends, to respond with speed and accuracy to any circumstance. In moving through these various steps with an intense energy, you must have faith that these intuitive powers will come to you over time. The ability to sense the overall dynamic in any situation, to foresee problems and solutions before anyone else, will bring you to the heights of power. Daily Law. If you keep to the path, these powers of mastery will come to you. Mastery, Chapter 6. Fuse the intuitive with the rational. Mastery.
And that was the Daily Law for March the 30th from the book The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Bishop Robert Barron.
What burdens us? What's the burden of life? It's this old lie that we will become happy if we just get enough of the goods of the world. If we can just draw enough into ourselves and hang on to it, then I'll be happy. I will not be happy. On the contrary. What do we all want? Well, this lovely word here, rest, it doesn't mean like lying in a hammock. It means fulfillment. It means peace. It means the joy that we all want. How do you get it? You get it by imitating the rhythms and dynamics of the divine life. Come to me, the Lord says. All you who are burdened by this lie you've been told, and in me you'll find rest.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, the only proper moral purpose of a government is to protect man's rights, which means to protect him from physical violence, to protect his right to his own life, to his own liberty, to his own property, and to the pursuit of his own happiness. Without property rights, no other rights are possible. Unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you are a Democrat, you should be voting Republican because the Republican Party is the true party of civil rights. It always has been. It was the party of civil rights in the Civil War, and right after the Civil War, it is the party that came up with the first three civil rights bills, all that were killed by Democrats, by the way. So it's the Republican Party that has always been about civil rights. So if you as a Democrat are interested in civil rights, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of Sunday morning futures with Maria Bartiromo. And who is the guy that's speaking here? Well, it just says impact of Biden's border crisis on U.S. security. And what's about is there's clips that went viral last week showing illegal immigrants crashing down the barriers, running over the top of National Guard troops to get into the country.
Coming from all over the world, marching, charging, stampeding into our country. Any president within his right mind, Maria, in the White House would say, this must end. It should have ended many times ago over the last 3 years because of fentanyl, because of people killed at the hands of people here illegally. The Constitution, Maria, says, Article 4, Section 4, that the country, the United States, shall protect each state from invasion. We're being invaded. That video clearly shows it. People argue, Maria, well, it has to be a hostile armed incursion. Well, just because these people don't have a dang uniform on doesn't mean they're not invading us.
Okay, so is two things. First of all, he's right. He's right that we're being invaded. He is right that to be outraged about that. I'm outraged about it. Absolutely correct. He quotes the Constitution. Is he correct to do that? Absolutely. Is where he's wrong is he argues with himself. He's ineffective. Republicans very often are right about things, but ineffective in communicating that righteousness. So what he does here is he starts off great. He says, look, Article 4, Section 4 says, blah, 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 and this is what's happening. And I give him credit for daring to draw a conclusion. The vast majority of people don't have the guts to draw a conclusion. So he concludes that we're being invaded. And that's great, fantastic. And he should have gone from there. But instead, he argues with himself. He says there are those that argue that they don't, that they're not armed. And once you do that, what you're telling everybody when you're arguing with yourself is that I don't know. I'm not sure. And once you've done that, then everybody walks away. Everybody quits listening to you. Everybody quits paying attention to you because their attitude is going to be, okay, fine, then get back to me when you are sure, when you do know. We're all busy people. I don't have time to sit here and try to decode his contradictions and figure out what it is he's trying to say. It's his responsibility to communicate effectively, and he fails to do so. Like I said, good for him for drawing a conclusion, good for him for drawing the right conclusions, bad for him for miscommunicating those conclusions. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now we pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
Interpretation. Metternich's goal was always a settlement that would best serve Austria's long-term interests. Those interests, he decided, involved not just preventing Russian intervention in Greece, but maneuvering the Tsar into permanently relinquishing the right to send troops into the Balkans, an enduring source of instability in Europe. So Metternich looked at the relative forces on both sides. What leverage did he have over the Russians? Very little. In fact, he had the weaker hand. But Metternich possessed a trump card. His years-long study of the Tsar's rather strange personality. Alexander was a highly emotional man who would act only in a state of exaltation. He had to turn everything into a crusade. So right at the beginning of the crisis, Metternich planted the seed that the real crusade here was one not of Christians against Turks, but of monarchies against revolution. Metternich also understood that his main enemy was Distria, and that he would have to drive a wedge between Distria and the Tsar. So he lured an envoy to Vienna. In one-on-one negotiations, Metternich was a chess player on the Grand Master level. With Tatishev, as with so many others, he first lowered his opponent's suspicions by playing the foppish, even dim-witted aristocrat. Next, he drew out the negotiations, miring them in abstract, legalistic discussions. That made him seem even more stupid, further misleading Tatishev, but also confusing and irritating him. A confused and riled negotiator is prone to make mistakes, such as reveal too much about what he is after, always a fatal error. A confused negotiator is also more easily seduced by emotional demonstrations. In this case, Metternich used the note from the Turks to stage a little drama in which he appeared to reveal a sudden change in his sympathies. That put Tatishev, and through him the Tsar, completely under his spell. From then on, it was child's play to reframe the discussion to suit Metternich's purpose. The offer to stage a conference, at which the Tsar would shine, was dazzling and alluring, and it also seemed to offer Russia the chance of greater influence in European affairs, one of Alexander's deepest desires. In fact, the result was the opposite. Alexander ended up signing a document that cut Russia out of the Balkans, Metternich's goal all along. Knowing how easily people are seduced by appearances, The Austrian minister gave the Tsar the appearance of power, being the center of attention at the conference, while he himself retained its substance, having the signed document. It is what the Chinese call giving someone a gaudy piece of painted tile in exchange for jade. As Metternich so often demonstrated, success in negotiation depends on the level of preparation. If you enter with vague notions as to what you want, you will find yourself shifting from position to position depending on what the other side brings to the table. You may drift to a position that seems appropriate, but does not serve your interests in the end. Unless you carefully analyze what leverage you have, your maneuvers are likely to be counterproductive. Before anything else, you must anchor yourself by determining with utmost clarity your long-term goals and the leverage you have for reaching them. That clarity will keep you patient and calm. It will also let you toss people meaningless concessions that seem generous but actually come cheap, for they do not hurt your real goals. Before the negotiations begin, study your opponents. Uncovering their weaknesses and unfulfilled desires will give you a different kind of leverage. The ability to confuse them, make them emotional, seduce them with pieces of tile. If possible, play a bit of the fool. The less people understand you and where you are headed, the more room you have to maneuver them into corners.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War from Chapter 21, Negotiate While Advancing, by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the enemies of my country.
48. Ian spun his chair away from the computer, the phone pressed to his ear. "Just slow down," he said. "You're sure it's the same piece of paper?" David was frantic. "Do I sound like I'm in doubt? It's the exact same page, and if you need me to come down there and do your job for you, then I will." All right, Ian said. "Take it easy. Let's think this through. Thinking is your job. I have no idea what to make of this, so start using that 30-pound brain of yours. It could... No, wait. Unless... Then he stopped abruptly, looking up. It's probably a strong-arm ploy. A what? Ian spun his chair to face the computer, speaking quickly. Think about it. If these people wanted to acquire that business for something shady, then they could feasibly need the next of kin information, so that if they needed to intimidate some people, that's who they'd strong-arm. Don't you get it? It wasn't a threat against your family. You were just backups in case something went wrong with the sale or the aftermath. If they needed to hold leverage over the original owners of that metalworking facility, then they had 3 hostages in Charlottesville. Either way, it's not about you or us. It's about that business. What's the connection? Ian thought for a moment. It could be 2 possibilities. The first is storage for the cargo. Why risk renting a storage unit and subjecting yourself to surveillance footage when you can buy a factory in advance and use it as you please? That's smart, David said. No, it's not. Far too high profile and too much effort for such a simple purpose. That brings me to the second possibility that a metalworking factory would serve. Production of the launch assembly. Now, you could launch those rockets from properly sized PVC tubes if you had to, but given what you just found, there's a possibility that the metalworking factory was acquired for the express purpose of building an assembly capable of launching the entire load at once and doing so with extreme precision for the kind of meticulous attack we've been looking for. So you think everything's at the factory now? The missiles and the launch assembly? I didn't say that. Barry Kahn is no idiot, and he wouldn't pair the launch assembly with the rockets until the last moment. And how much did the factory sell for? $5.2 million. Jesus, I got in the wrong line of work, he said. But think about that. There's no way BK has the means or the connections to facilitate that sale himself. Someone handpicked him because he was smart and motivated, but the guy comes from a poor village in western China that had almost its entire population imprisoned or killed by the government. That means we're looking for a financier. Find me the buyer data, names, addresses, all of it. Ian put the phone on speaker and set it on the desk, and set to work opening browser windows on the computer and inputting information as fast as David could relay it to him. POC is Sam Burgess, making the buy on behalf of Steno LLC in Richmond. Address of record? Within minutes, Ian had 14 browser windows open, tracing the chain of business links as high as he could. And when he found what he was looking for, it was with a sense of exhilaration that he couldn't keep out of his voice. Steno LLC is one of 7 under a corporate umbrella owned by a multinational conglomerate called Palvita International. That conglomerate is headed by a businessman named Wei Zhao. Now, there's plenty written about this guy. He's one of the 100 richest men in China. So you think Zhao has some Uyghur connection, David replied, and is bankrolling the attack through one of his business entities? Ian didn't answer immediately. He was too preoccupied with the connection he'd just found, a potentially groundbreaking development added to the mix of already perplexing factors surrounding this case. Zhao couldn't be the mastermind behind this. Wealthy businessmen didn't involve themselves in the tactical specifics of terrorist operations. At most, they were financiers behind the scenes, a craft that had been perfected by rich Saudis over the years as they funneled vast sums of cash to Islamic terror organizations via a series of cutouts and laundered transfers. Zhao could have paid into the attack, but he hadn't constructed it. David asked, "You still there?" "Yeah," Ian responded, "and it's too soon to say for sure, but Zhao as financier makes sense to me at present. And in lieu of everything else about this that has defied logic, it's a pretty good start." "All right, this has gone far enough. I'll notify Duchess." "Slow down," Ian continued, taking the phone off speaker and bringing it to his ear before continuing. "We do that, and she knows we've been pulling strings even before she finds out that we cleaned out the isofac. This is a working theory, but it doesn't mean I'm right. And if I'm not, or there's something I'm not considering, then calling Duchess now will accomplish nothing but putting ourselves in prison on an educated hunch. I'll have Worthy put eyes on the factory. If there's any sign of the launch assembly being transported, we signal the alarm." "Agreed. And the next step is to confirm or deny that the facility was used to manufacture a launch assembly. If it wasn't, no harm, no foul. We keep looking. But if it was, we need to find out 2 things. If it's still at the factory, and if not, where it's headed. How do we do that?" "Only one way," Ian said. "I need to get inside that factory." 49. Cancer was the last man to arrive at the team house. He followed the sound of murmuring voices toward the back, where he found David and Riley standing behind Ian's workstation. Their intelligence specialist was responding to the other 2 men's requests to zoom in on the overhead imagery of a large building. No one looked up at Cancer as he entered, and he announced, "Hey, shitheads, you start planning this thing without me?" Ian spun his chair to face him. "Yes, good, because I'm tired of doing all the work around here. Riley, why do you look so bloated?" The huge medic shrugged helplessly. "I had a second lunch." Then, a moment later, and in response to the team's collective blank stare, "What? I had 2 surveillance positions. Both were restaurants." Cancer asked, "Suicide, what do we got?" David said, "We're waiting for Worthy to get eyes on, but I've got a plan based on imagery." "Based on imagery? Does that mean you've never been inside this factory?" "No. Not once? I said no," David replied testily. "I've been a little busy traipsing around the world with you dickheads." Riley added, "We'll have to do a surreptitious entry after nightfall." Cancer smiled at him. "Ain't no surreptitious entry about it, boys. This is a B&E, pure and simple." Starting to feel like a teenager again. "Let's see the game cam." Ian maximized a satellite photo on his computer screen showing an overhead view of the facility, most of which was the huge square rooftop. The remainder was an L-shaped addendum to the workshop, which Ian traced with a finger. "Offices are in this portion, and that's where I'll need access. The rest is primarily a workshop for metal fabrication." Cancer nodded, quickly scanning the graphic markups indicating windows and doorways in the form of red arrows with breakout boxes listing the dimensions from construction blueprints. Ian must have already hacked the city land records. "What's the size?" Ian replied, 32,000 square feet. Cancer gave a low whistle, then cut his eyes to David. "What's the plan?" "I was thinking
Ian bypasses alarm power, David said, pointing to the building on the screen, and then we all enter through the northeast corner of the office portion, start our clearance there, and let Ian do his hard drive cloning while the rest of us clear the building to search for the launch assembly. Cancer squinted hard, looking physically pained by the words. What's the matter? David asked. Boss, with a building this size, that's asking for trouble. Anyone in the workshop could hear us enter, if not be tipped off by a silent alarm and make a call or be on the run to the main road before we had any idea. Now, I've been in my share of factories, and the workshop is usually a wide open space that can be largely cleared by visual. So I say we make entry through two sides of the building simultaneously. Ian and Riley through the south end, me and you through the northeast. You and Riley, David corrected him. I'll stay with Ian. Cancer looked to David, then to Riley, then back to David. What's the matter? You don't trust me unless our resident Boy Scout is at my side? Those are your words, not mine. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? David gave an exaggerated cough, then cleared his throat. I'm not saying anything other than I didn't say that. Cancer glanced at Ian, who was doing his best to suppress a laugh. Fuck is so funny over there? Ian shook his head, saying nothing. Fine, Cancer said. David and Ian break into the short side of the L-shaped building on the south end, start clearing offices and ripping hard drives, while me and our Geneva Conventions expert enter through the northeast corner, then clear the workshop. If we find the rockets, everyone pulls out and we tip off the cops. Attack stopped. If it's empty, we consolidate for local security and Ian can take his time. Anyone gets interrupted, we bail out the backside because the first cops will come to the front of the building. What do you think, Suicide? David was motionless, his gaze focused on the screen as Cancer waited for a response. Finally, he began to nod slightly. Yeah, that's a better plan. We can't risk getting rolled up on this. Let's go with Cancer's idea. So it's settled, Cancer said. But we got a problem. Before he could elaborate, Ian's phone rang. He announced, It's Worthy. Answering the call on speaker, he said, Racecon, the guys are here and we're looking at the overhead imagery. Where are you at? Worthy's southern accented voice was calm as he replied, Adjacent parking lot off the north corner. Got a clear line of sight through the trees to the service road and around the side to the loading dock. Ian scrolled across the satellite view on the screen. Looks like a good spot. What do you see? No movement during my drive-by or since I've been in position, but there's a few company trucks parked at the back of the lot. Don't see any privately owned vehicles, so it could be empty. If there were any major muscle movement, I'd be able to see it, but it looks like the factory has shut down for the holiday. David said, Stay there and call us the second that changes. You see any trucks departing with possible launch assembly components, I want you to follow them. We'll scramble from here to back you up and I'll notify Duchess. She's gonna be pissed, he replied. Yeah, David agreed. But it's better than the alternative. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. We'll be standing by. You got it, boss. After Ian ended the call, Cancer said, Now about this problem. What problem? Ian asked. What are we supposed to raid the factory with? Our dicks? We gotta procure some firearms. David said, Firearms are the one thing we have. No, they ain't. We fire one shot in there and the police find a piece of brass that Duchess can trace to our agency-issued weapons. How do you think that's going to work out for us? Hell, I wouldn't put it past her to check the ballistics on any team-caliber kills in the Charlottesville area. She's already going to find the isofact cleaned out any day now. No need to speed up that process. After a moment of silence, Riley said, I could do a round trip to my house, raid the gun collection. If I leave now, I could make it back by... He consulted his watch. Midnight? Maybe 1 o'clock? We could probably be in the door by 2. Get moving, Cancer said. We'll get to work refining our plan for the B&E.
And those were chapters 48 and 49 of The Enemies of My Country from Jason Casper. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.